Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about why we're here tonight. So we're so excited to have Minda Harts, author of her new book, The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table, here to share pieces of her book and her story. Minda is the founder of the Memo LLC, a career development company for women of color. She's also an adjunct professor of public service at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service, and a speaker who's conducted workshops and keynotes at corporations like Bloomberg, Google, Time Inc., South by Southwest, and now New Relic. She's joined by Mandy Bynum McLaughlin, a career tech sales leader turned diversity and inclusion officer with extensive experience in scaling large sales organizations. Working for Yelp in its early days and ingrained her appreciation for change as the only constant, gaining the invaluable experience that comes from building an employee-centered and culture-conserving organization during rapid growth. Her greatest passion and now achieved dream job is championing inclusion in the workplace to break stereotypes and reduce marginalization and tokenism. She's been lucky enough to work for companies that share that same passion and will continue to hold future partnerships to the same standard. So we're going to start by welcoming Minda Harts to do a little bit of reading, and then the two of them will come together for some conversation. So help me welcome Minda, please.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you all. I'm short, so I hope that you all can see me in the back. As I am Minda Harts, and it's such a pleasure to be here. This is my first time coming to Portland, and so I'm on a 16-city tour, and I think this is number 8. They're starting to mesh together. But you could be anywhere in the world right now, and you're here with me, and it just warms my heart. You know, before, a lot of people may not know, but before I got a book deal, as we were shopping it around, they said there was no audience for a book like this. And so I'm just so happy that we see each other in this book. And so I'm going to read just a little bit to set the stage before me and Mandy get into it and really talk about why I wrote the book and some themes in there. But I'm going to read from my chapter called The Ugly Truth. And it'll set the stage for the book for those who haven't read it. And for those who don't have that dot on your badge, you can go online and get it. So, racial growing pains. After college, I entered the workforce like most newly minted graduates, excited to be out on my own and prepared to live out my dreams. But before I could live the dream, I had to go through some racial growing pains that had me questioning my sanity and how long I would last working with white people. Not because I didn't like them, but because of the problematic stuff that came out of their mouths a few times a day. I vividly recall 2 examples of this kind of nonsense as if it happened yesterday. First, I remember picking up my boss from the airport before a big client meeting. It was Sunday afternoon, and I was wearing a summer dress, sandals, and a fresh manicure. The color was burnt orange. My boss and another colleague hop into the rental car. About 10 minutes down the road, my boss jokes, "You people love your bright colors." He laughed like it was comedy night at the Apollo, and my other male colleague chimed in with his agreement. I will never understand how my nail color turned into a 15-minute conversation on how Black people love bright colors. But mind you, this was from their limited perspective on us people. I laughed it off, despite being internally annoyed and thoroughly confused. I happen to like burnt orange. The last time I checked, Crayola didn't make a special edition of bright crayons for Black people. I was too young and not well-versed enough to address my boss in a manner that would make this a teachable moment for him. I regret letting him get away with such a lame stereotype. Soon I began to think that this must be normal white workplace behavior because things like this came out of his mouth on a daily basis. Perhaps if I had said something, he would never have made another woman of color feel bad about her bright colors again. But I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if I should address occurrences like these. I would tell myself that he didn't mean any harm so that I could push through my workday and not internalize what he really meant, which was to make me feel different and ostracized. Women of color are not encouraged to speak out on situations that involve race, and when we do, HR isn't always the most welcoming. That's just one example of having black and brown skin and not knowing who might advocate for you, or whether today will be the day you're left out on the island alone. Being a Black or brown woman at work shouldn't be so hard, but the powers that be don't have anyone to hold them accountable. And I'm going to skip a little bit because I got to give you that Sam's Club kind of Costco sample. Can't give it to you all, okay? There are things you don't find out until you experience them. There were plenty of times I wanted to run out of the office and cry, but I had to suck it up and remain strong. And there was one moment in my career where I got tired of being the strong Black woman, and I broke down in tears in my manager's office. I mean, where do the broken hearts go of women of color when we can't take it any longer? The Memo. Thank you. Mandy. Anybody felt like they needed to run out of the office and cry sometimes?
It's so refreshing to hear just like in mass. We just don't have that enough. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Again, I'm Mandy. I run all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy with my other half, Rachel Etnier, who is here, who, by the way, this was her idea with Tim Butler in the back. I am just the talking head. This event and all of these events that we do every month take a lot of people to put together. And I thank everyone, Lauren especially. You started 8 weeks ago? Yeah. And this is already her second Future Talk, so thank you again to everyone. Okay. First, as soon as I saw that Drake quote, I think I already told you, but talking about trophies, I was like, yes. When I saw Minda today, I told her how, maybe I didn't tell you, maybe I said it in my head, not out loud, that I was up until 1 o'clock, like 3 nights in a row, reading, when I definitely should have been in bed because I have 2 young children. And it was I just felt like you were a friend in the room, just telling me validating all of the things that we've been through. So I want to talk about first how you got the courage to start the Memo. You talk about in your book how there was a certain point where it just like hit you like a ton of bricks. You're like, we have to do something. These seats, we are coming for these seats, watch out. So what was that? Was there one particular event, or was there something, was it like a slow burn that got you to that point of like, I have to do something?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for those who don't know, I am a lover of grits and rap lyrics, so I could not write the business book without dropping nuggets of lyrics. And the reason how I got the name The Memo is a Drake song called Trophies. And I was on the train from New York to D.C., and through my earbuds came, "Did y'all boys not get the memo?" And it reminded me, that's when it hit me. It's like they hadn't got the memo. These workplaces hadn't got the memo that we're degreed, we're credentialed, we have all of these things, we check all the boxes, and yet we're not in some of the highest levels of leadership. And I wasn't okay with that. And so I thought about what would career development look like if it was centered on the experiences of Black and brown women, which is oftentimes not the case because it's this one broad stroke of women, right? And naturally, normally, historically, it's white women first and then everybody after. And so I'm saying that it's time for us to, as Martin Luther King said, live in the monologue and not the dialogue. And so I had to lean into my courage and make sure that what's the legacy I'm going to leave behind? I'm going to continue to be cautious and not talk about some of these racial inequities, or am I going to do this so that the next generation of women of color will have a better opportunity and not have to run to the bathroom, right, or have to be that strong, anything that they'll be able to speak their truth. And so I felt like my curiosity to write this was larger than my fear, and here we are. Yeah.
So let's talk more about that, because you have a part in the book where you talk about your curiosity outweighed your fear, and that's huge. I think a lot of people in tech are always thinking about what's next. We don't stay at companies very long, and sometimes it's hard to even imagine what that next step is. So for you, in creating the Memo and saying, like, I'm going to create this company, a lot of people told you that it was either already out there or there wasn't an audience, which are the exact opposite things, or that all sorts of things that you just couldn't do it. So, and when you first started, there were times you're like, maybe I can't. So can you talk us through some of those times and how you broke through?
Yeah, it's such a blessing to really be here, sitting here with you, because I started the company alone in 2015. And then my co-founder came on board maybe 7 months after I had started the Memo. And I was still working my corporate job when I started it. And so I realized that I had no intentions on being a full-time entrepreneur. I had no intentions. This was just, I knew that there was a gap, and I wanted to be part of helping that change, right? Close the gap. How do we share that secret sauce? And so that was the impetus for starting the company, The Memo, because I knew that sometimes Black and brown women need career advice geared toward them. And so that was what I wanted to do. But as I started going down this path, I realized I'm walking into my purpose, which I had no idea. And I just felt that pull to really speak more and advocate more on the behalf of women of color in the workplace. And so we tried to go out and raise funds for the company because that's what we've been told to do sometimes. And I was met with, no, this will never work. We even were offered 2 years ago to be bought out if we stopped talking about women of color.
Cool. Go, 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 go.
Yeah. So so we're like, nope, we're going to keep this train going. And I had to keep working my day jobs to keep funding myself.
Jobs?
Yes. To keep funding the business, because I knew that if we kept going, and even earlier in the year, if I'm being honest, can we keep it 100?
Yeah.
Even at the start of the year, me and my co-founder were having a conversation about, is this sustainable? Can we keep the doors open because we're not scaling as fast as we would like to? We're seeing other people who don't even have any members getting millions of dollars, and we're barely getting $10,000 here and there, and it's not enough. And I said, her name is Lauren. I said, Lauren, just stay with me until I can pay you. Like, I want to put some respect on your check. Don't leave until I can pay you. And this is important because she's like, okay, I believe in the mission. I believe in what we're doing. And maybe a month after that, things changed around. And for the first time, I was able to take a salary. I was able to pay her, and we brought on a third person. But it was just knowing that my curiosity was larger than my fear, and keep going. And I was able to leave my day job and all those sorts of things. But I knew that there were women like you that needed to get the memo, right? It was important that companies needed to get the memo. And so it was all worth it. All the negative bank account balance, all of that stuff was worth it because we knew that it was legacy building is what we were doing.
Yeah. So let's more about legacy. I think there's another part in your book where you talk about there are a lot of white male men, hetero, cis, in leadership. And just because we are not in leadership doesn't mean we can't lead.
Right.
But some of us have been beat down so many times. We've had quite a bit of trauma and are just like, I just going to sit here and collect my paycheck and do what I got to do. So when you do get into a position of leadership, we tend to carry a lot of responsibility and weight on our shoulders because if I'm the only one here, I want to account for all of these people behind me. So how did you grapple with that responsibility and kind of separate it from the mission, if you could?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So for me, it really boiled down to we've never, as women of color, we've never needed an invitation to lead. Even when we haven't had the title, we've always been in leadership roles, right? We might not, we might be at the table and not get paid for it, not have the name behind it, but we've always been leading. And so I'm saying let's reshift this narrative. Harriet Tubman didn't need anybody to put a certificate and a gold star on her to say, lead. And so all of the things that we have inside of us is just, so it goes back to this. A lot of times our narrative has been just keep your head down and work hard. That anybody ever been told that? And then somebody will come and tap you on the back and be like, hey girl, it's your time. And that's not how it goes. Nope. And so I'm saying lift your head up and let them see you. Let your voice not be inaudible. So if we want to be in leadership roles, we need to articulate our worth. We need to quantify our worth. And I think for so long we have been cautious to say what we want. And I think that's some of it, right? And then I think as we start to have these candid conversations with our managers and plot out our plans, then we put it on them. And if they can't give us what we want, then we need to figure out who will. And I'm telling you, don't lean out now. You have come too far.
Can we take a quick pause and turn our chairs closer?
We sure can.
Or just more facing each other. I just feel so far away from you. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Much better. Okay, so when it comes to stepping up, again, back to that fear.
Yeah.
And you just talked a little bit just now about like bring your data, bring the words. Do you think that is something? Who are your allies in that, and who really encouraged you to step up, or was it just Oprah?
Well, Oprah has given us everything,
Yes.
but so I talk about this in the book. I have a chapter called "Building Your Squad," and it's really important to have those people who are who are your champions, right? From the top down, from the janitor to the CEO, people need to know you and be able to vouch for you. And for me, how I got my seat at the table was 2 white men that really saw something in me, but I had to make myself visible to them first. Okay. Again, they weren't tapping me on the shoulder. I had to make my presence known. But part of that is once they saw what I had to offer after quantifying my worth and telling them what I wanted, they saw, yeah, let's do this. And so from there, my career accelerated exponentially. Probably would have things that might have taken, someone who had 10 years experience, I might have had 3, and I was in that seat. And that was because I was going out after 6. I talk about after 6, letting people, getting out of your cube, letting people see you and get to know you. I know that we may not like to go in the break room for the birthday parties and all that kind of stuff. You just want to do your work. But it's important for people to feel like they know you. And that's how you find the sponsors or you find success partners that I talk about in the book. So I think it's really important that we, again, lift our heads up. For so long, we've kept our heads down. And you all have very lovely faces, and you're doing really great work, and it's time that people see that. And once they hear what you're doing, then I think you can find the right people to align with. But you won't know that if you just keep your head down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talk about being an extrovert also.
Mm-hmm.
I am as well. So this stuff is easy peasy lemon squeezy. Like I thrive around people. I don't necessarily like to talk to people all the time, but I like to be around and soak up their energy. So you talk about like, hey, not everyone is an extrovert. But talk about how, if you're not, and if you're not comfortable with this, how you can set yourself up to know that like you're not going to the birthday party because you like the person necessarily, but because you know it's going to get you somewhere.
Yes, and this is for if you want that seat, right? If you don't want that seat, keep doing what you're doing. You just put your earmuffs on. But if you want the seat, there's certain things that we're going to have to do to get that seat. And so part of that is, I talk about it in the book, is at one point in time, I was deathly afraid of speaking up in public speaking. And I knew that I wanted a seat at the table, but how do I change that, right? And so one of the things that I did was take an improv class. And that was really pushing me out of my comfort zone. And so I said, how do I turn this weakness into superpower strength? And I went to this improv class, and they would like snap their fingers, and you'd have to bark like a dog and do all these crazy things that made me feel very uncomfortable. But I realized that I had to do this, not for my company, but for me. Every investment, every strategy, everything that I was doing, I had to see it in strategic mode. So it's not that I'm going to the happy hour because I care about Bob and what Bob has to say, but I know that Bob needs to see me. Bob needs to get to know me.
Yeah.
And so, I don't have to stay there all night long till karaoke comes on. I do what I need to do and then bounce. And so I think that as we start to shape what we want, we have to do it with strategy in mind. So everything is part of strategy. It's not just because.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Or you could wait till karaoke, be the 5th person on the list, do a rap song, drop the mic, then leave.
Yes, and everybody's happy. So you can, but it's not about, I hear, this is one thing I hear all the time when we run these career boot camps is, Minda, I don't want to go out, I don't drink, I don't that. It's like, you don't have to do any of that. You can get a seltzer water, but vibe out, let people get to know you and see you in a different light, because some of those narratives that are placed on us, if they get to see us in a different way, then when someone tries to call you an angry black this or a feisty that or a docile this, they can be like, no, that's not who Minda is. I know her and blah, 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 right? But it's that relationship building that can really be the game changer.
And relationship building is different from playing into a caricature or not being able to be your whole self. We're not just our skin, we are nuanced and complicated. That's really, really interesting because sometimes that is a hard step to take, to let your guard down just a little bit.
Just a little. And we don't have to tell. I know I grew up in, a black household, and my mom and dad, don't be telling everybody your business. You don't have to tell everybody your business, but you let little bits out so that people feel like they know you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crap, there was a part about that. Okay, so I'll remember that in a second. But let's go back. So when you were in high school, I don't know if this is where your nose started, not this nose, but the nose started. And you were told by your counselor, like, you can't go to that school, you can't go to this school, good luck. Was that when you thought, like, wait a second, something's off here? Or tell us about, like, how that energy came about and what pushed you to say, no, that's not, I can go to those schools.
Yep. So one of the things I talk about in the book is I grew up in a predominantly white town, and so was very one of few. All the black people in town knew each other. I could probably count us all on two hands. And so one of the things that for the black students that were in this town, they would send all of us to the junior college, and then the white students would be shipped off to, the good 4-year universities and colleges. And so as a first-generation college student, I didn't know. My parents didn't know either. And so and this is the authority at the high school, so obviously I'm taking their advice because they are the expert. And so if it wasn't the junior college for us, then it was a military route. And so, but I didn't know, when you're 17, you don't know that these dynamics are taking place all the time, right? And so I was just like, oh, I'm the first person to go to college, so this is awesome. And so I went to the junior college for a little over a year, and as I was there, I just started to have an awakening and seeing all of the people that look like me around, and I thought, where are the white kids at? Not that they weren't there, but it wasn't as many of us. And so I just started to think, what are my other options and how do I get there? And so then I started to seek different people out in my community and hear their stories. And I was always a very ambitious, I would say little person, but I guess I still fit that mold. But I was always like reaching out to people in my community and talking to those like businessmen and women who were successful and asking them what they did, but they weren't telling me some of the things that I think they thought I could do. And so I just started to see what other people were doing, and I saw that, 4-year college, the Cosby Show, you watch that, everybody's going to college. And so I'm like, I need to get to university. And I will say that for me, it was that catalyst into just cultural competency,
right?
And just to be able to see what I could be, and meeting with other intellectuals that look like me. And so it's very hard to be something that you can't see. And so I knew that I just had to dream bigger. And that was just something, and I thank God every morning I wake up that he put that inside of me to be able to know that just because my circumstance might be this, there's so much more on that other side. And so I just No might have been the starting point, but it's never been it's not the comma. Might be a comma, but it's not the period, right? And so I hope that guidance counselor will read the book, because I do talk about him in the book.
So I'm distracted again by this feature you have on your ring finger. Is that a sculpture of your pet?
It is. I am a crazy pet mom, yes. Okay. I have a French bulldog at home, and my partner knows that I'm very crazy about my dog, and so since I'd be on the 16-city book tour, they had a sculpture made of my French bulldog, so when I start to miss him, I can look down. Yes.
For your partner. Dogs can't talk. That's so great.
Yes.
So the other thing I really want to talk about is I still want to dig a little bit deeper into how do you form that language to speak up for yourself? Like the first time you do it, or did you have to have someone who was like, no, you can do this? Or you said that your curiosity ruled your fear. But there's a lot of people in the room who I know personally who I'm just like, come on, you can do this.
Yeah.
But it's like, what is our responsibility, not only in speaking up for ourselves, but advocating for other people, especially when we're scared enough just to talk for ourselves?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And for me, I say it very honestly that I did not wake up like this. I'm not like Beyonce. It took small acts of courage to get to this state right now. And as I talk about, so many things happened in my career. For a long time, I didn't think I could say anything. I just would tell myself they didn't mean any harm. They didn't mean any harm. And after years and years of that, I'm like, wait a second, maybe they do mean harm, and at what expense? So I'm not speaking up on some of these things that are happening to make them feel good about it, but it's really causing all this trauma to myself. And when you keep pushing things aside and saying, oh, they don't mean any harm, and oh, let me keep going, that's an emotional tax on you. And it started really hindering my well-being because I felt like my voice was silenced. I felt like my voice was inaudible. And I'm here, and you see me, but I'm not able, they say bring your authentic self to work, but I don't even know who that is anymore. You've told me how my hair should look. You've told me how to speak. You've told me what I could speak on, what I can't speak on. And so I don't know who that is, and I don't know what I can say. I'm very fragile at this point. And I talk about a situation in the book, and after I was broke down in the workplace of being one of the only ones, and my colleagues just watched it all unfold, and nobody did anything about it, it was one of those things where I'm like, I will never, not on my watch, let another Black or brown woman go through this pain and hurt every single day and nobody do anything about it. And so for me, it was like this rebirth, like not just for me, but for the next woman. And if we're talking about securing our seat, then how in the hell am I going to sit here and be silent on these matters? Now, again, I know that there are ways in diplomacy to speak on these matters, right? So I couldn't just get on the chair and be like, Bob, you're driving me crazy. I had to do it with poise and professionalism.
Bob, you're racist.
Yeah, you can't say those things. And so, but what I realized was if I'm not going to be my best advocate, who will? And those little bits, again, small acts of courage. And when you start to boundary set in the workplace, then people will know that I'm not going to say that, right? But if they know that they can say whatever to you and you're going to laugh it off and just smile and grin and bear it, then they will. And I wrote the book very much from a vulnerability state, and I laid it all on the line because I don't want us to keep having these same conversations. We, as people of color, we learn how to not microaggress people in the workplace. So how is it that other people aren't, right? And so it's like, let's have these conversations. We're all adults. And so for me, it was more of a frustration. Like when I think about the future, the Ida B. Wells, or the past, the Ida B. Wells, the Shirley Chisholms of the world, they leaned into their courage so that you and I could be in a room like this to be able to have these conversations. They didn't have others to lean into. And so if I see you being microaggressed, I'm going to be there to support you as your sister. So let's not let each other hurt and watch it go down. We are our sister's keeper. And I think also those who aren't of color have to step up and also not just watch it all go down. So I think it takes all hands on deck to really move forward in the conversation. And so it wasn't about me. It was about everybody else, because for me, I'm like, okay, this is good. But if I were to leave, so another thing I have to say is when I wrote this book, I was actually sick. And I don't talk about this very often, but I was really sick, and I had a major surgery the day before my final copy was due. And I said, if I don't make it through this next phase of life, I want you to know that you don't have to lean out, that you worked too hard to do that, and that your careers matter. Maybe you haven't been centered before, but now is our time. And we have to be there for one another. And so this was a love letter so that you knew that you are seen, you are affirmed, and we don't always get that every day in the office. And so I wanted you to know, if you don't hear it from anybody else, that you matter. Your careers matter. You don't have to defer your dreams due to cautious leaders and companies.
Woo. Woo. That was a perfect segue. I want to ask you next.
Someone bring me a drink.
Yeah, seriously. You can have the rest of mine, but I'm a little bit, too far down. Okay, there's a chapter in the book where if I had a physical book, I'd be like, because I was up till 2 o'clock because some drama went down. You had to give some feedback, and it took you a minute. And I would love, I know that not everyone in the room has the book because they should go out and buy it, but I would love a little tidbit about how you go about giving someone feedback when you are at this, well, you don't even have to be at this point. Like maybe you've practiced, because it's not just giving feedback because you're uncomfortable, it's making sure that that person is comfortable too because you have more risk than them.
Right.
And you're also doing the emotional labor. So talk to us about how to give feedback and stand up for yourself. I know we're talking about the same things, but.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. I think self-advocacy is one of the most important tools we will ever have in our toolkit. Because once we learn how to flex that muscle, we'll be better off inside the workplace. And I think that for me, I was almost forced to speak up for myself because so many things were happening in this environment that it was killing me softly, right? And I realized that if I don't advocate for myself, then these things are going to continue to happen. And I think that it's important to at least let it be known, let it be documented, because sometimes we allow things to go for so long and then there's no paper trail of it. And so for me, just like anything, like a negotiation, any tough conversation, a courageous conversation, you should do it with your squad. You should do it with somebody and talk it through and role play. I know we hate role playing, right? But having those difficult conversations, because it's a tax, right? But taking a good girlfriend or a good mentor or a good sponsor and saying, you know what, I need to have this conversation with you, and because it's a lot. I had to have a difficult conversation with a manager, and it was a lot for me to I wish I would have role played with someone, if they said this, how do you say this, that sort of thing. And so I think sometimes, again, the strategy in it, because sometimes it's hard to divorce your feelings from a situation, and you can't get the most out of that. I teach a course at NYU on engaging talent development, and one of the things that I do, I create a simulation for them to have difficult conversations with each other, and then there's a third party who assesses, like, what could you have said differently? And I think we have to really be intentional about our words, and I think that you can have courageous conversations without shaming people, right? Because at the core of it, I think we all want to create this equitable environment where we can have those conversations, but we also, on the other end of it, when you're receiving the feedback, you have to do courageous listening, because courageous listening is just as hard, okay, and not being offended. And so I think it takes courageous articulation, but then courageous listening, and if we both practice those things, then I think we'd be so much further in the workplace.
Okay, let's do it right now then.
Okay. I'll be the listener.
Okay. All right. So let's say you said, do an obvious one, you touched my hair, and I don't know you, aside from the fact that you're my boss. This has not happened, by the way. I'm just making this up. So I'm really hurt because you're like the fifth person today who has touched my hair because I just got a new weave, and it's great. So I'm like, I just have to tell her because I can't do this anymore. So here I come. Hey, Minda, can I talk to you about something real quick?
Yeah, Mandy, what's up?
Okay, well, I just first want to tell you I'm not pregnant. I'm not quitting.
Okay, good.
So I want to get just want to talk about something. So, I don't like having my hair touched.
But I like your hair.
Yeah. So
it's very pretty and silky, but I like it when you wear it curly. I really don't like it when you...
Thank you for that.
No, that's what they say,
Yeah. We're natural. That's really nice of you. Has anyone ever touched your hair without asking?
No, they haven't.
Yeah, it's weird, huh? So so there's something about, being a person of color where people think maybe, I'm not assuming this is you, but there have been times when people assume that what is on your head is not owned by you, therefore other people can touch it. Tell me what you think about that. How do you feel after me telling you that?
I'm actually glad that you told me, because I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable.
I appreciate that.
Good job, right? But I think those conversations have to be had, because I mean, I'm a 30-plus-year-old woman, and people are still touching my head like I'm a dog, and it's like, no, that's not okay. And so I think maybe had I said something, right, when it first started happening, even if they were in their feelings about it, but at least they know, right?
And if you don't do it right, that person will come up next and say, oh, don't touch her hair.
She's an angry black woman.
Great.
But how did it feel for you having to, I mean, I know it's annoying to have to even say that, but do you think the more that you say it, and then it becomes more normal, but if it's only I'm the only one saying don't touch my hair, but I see, my colleague, they're touching their hair too, how does that play into?
I mean, the whole white fragility thing comes in because you want to protect their fragility because they are, at the end of the day, still in power and can fire you if they don't like you, or they can build a case to do so. So towing that line between, like, you might not know this, but, and trying to make it about yourself as much as possible while also educating that this is not just a me thing.
Right.
It's not easy, which is why I typically role play with my husband who's white, and he's all confused. So it's like, he gives me all the responses that are going to come at me, and it's really great because I can prep myself.
It's so important to do that because these are hard conversations to have, and if you're not equipped to kind of deal with that, then it can be very emotional because I talk about these equations, right? I don't know, if I tell you how this is making me feel in the workplace, I don't know what your response is going to be. I can't guess. But one part of the conversation I can control is me telling you. And I think that once we find that power in knowing that we have that power to do this is our hair, these are, things in our body, and I think it's once we lean into that courage and make our voices audible again and take that power back and rewrite our own narratives in the workplace. So yes, they might say that you're an angry black whatever, but that's on them. I don't subscribe to that anymore. Yep.
All right. Let's talk about negotiation.
Let's do it.
So as women in general, all women, we stereotypically are not good at negotiating for ourselves. For other people, whole other story. So when it comes, and I believe there was a portion where you speak about finding out your pay versus someone else. So first of all, how do you even get curious about it and be like, I deserve more? And then once you realize you deserve more, how do you go about like either researching or bringing up the issue? And then if you could, then segue into when you negotiate for a position.
Yes. So I have a chapter in there talking about a negotiation that I did for a new company, but then one internally because you can negotiate on all sides of the table. And it's called No Money, More Problems. And so it's really important that again, our self-advocacy, because if you don't advocate on your behalf and you don't equip yourself with the right tools and the right research, then those conversations can sometimes go left. And so for me, like, for example, negotiation, every state has an equal pay law, and so knowing what those are. So when you go to have those conversations, that you can embed that into the conversation, because when people know you got your stuff together, they'll have a whole different kind of conversation with you. But if you come like kind of half, about it, then they know that. Okay. Then they know that. And so I'm saying that you have so much that you're already doing this work. So learning how to quantify our worth and articulate that in a way that positions us for a win. And so for me, whenever I went in for a win and I role played, again, I had this phenomenal white man named Chuck, and he lives in San Francisco, and I didn't use real names in the book, but Chuck, I did use his real name because he was such a force in my life, and I was always, before I met him, I didn't know that you could negotiate salaries, and he told me there's a range for a reason, right? And so being able to have these conversations and being able to tell your career story. So yes, on paper, I may not have 7 to 10 years experience, but I've been doing this work. So how do I tell that story in a way that positions me for the higher end of the salary range? And just when I learned these techniques around it, and with Chuck, we would role play. When they say this, you say this. And then also learning that it's not just about the money, but there's these fringe benefits as well, career coaches, subscriptions, all of these different things that sometimes we're just so happy to get there and get the title that we don't think more strategically about the moves that we're making. Because if you lowball yourself now and you say you want to make six figures, if you're not making that, then every time you don't ask, it chips away. And that six figure gets further and further and further away. And so every time I asked, I knew that, again, part of that equation, I don't know what they're going to say, but this is what I want. And so making sure that I have all of my ducks in a row. And so I've been lucky in my negotiations that for the most part, I've always gotten what I've asked for. And if I didn't, I went somewhere who could give it to me. And so I think, again, knowing your worth. Once we know our worth, we're so much powerful.
Yes.
Did that answer the question?
It did.
Okay.
Thank you. But then I lost my next one. Talking about negotiations. And we were talking about... This is what happens when you wake up at 4 o'clock. I went to bed at midnight. I apologize.
It's okay. I got you in deep thought.
I know. I should have written it down. So there is a part of your book that talks about you were at one company and then, again, some stuff went down. You went to a different company and interviewed and then came back. Mm-hmm. What was that experience like? Because I think for us, a lot of us get into the position where we maybe are fed up but don't know we have other options.
Absolutely. And I think that women of color, we specialize in this degree called making it work. We just try to make it work. And we know that this is not the place, but we keep trying. And in my situation, I was in one company for 10 years. And I wasn't looking to leave. I thought, they don't microaggress me too much. I've settled into it. It's all good. I get paid well. I have a good title. But then I had a recruiter contact me. And because I was in a niche field, I'd had recruiters contact me a lot. But this particular one had my ear in a different way. And I'm like, tell me more. And so they were offering $50,000 more than I was already making. The title that I wanted, had I stayed at my company, I may not have gotten that for, who knows, I don't know ever, or for a long time. And so they were the ones giving me that call, realized that I could have more and that I didn't really know, I guess, my worth and what my options were. I thought that this was the best I could do. And it was fine, right? But once you know that there's options, you start to make moves differently. And so I had this conversation with Chuck, again, what should I be doing? What do you think? And he said, well, do you want to take this position? It would require me to leave one coast to go to another coast. And so I said, well, if my current company could give me what I wanted, then I wanted to stay here. And so I went into this high stakes negotiation with them. And they came back a little half of what I asked for. And then we did some more negotiating, and they're like, well, we can give you 6 months now and 6 months later. And I'm like, so I took this job and I went over to this other place, and it was the worst experience in my whole entire life. And I had a great paycheck, but in fine print, it was like, this is going to be the worst time of your life. But I was living in this great place, apartment, shaking at the end of the day in my nice apartment. But what I realized was there, again, knowing you have options, and I'm glad that I had that opportunity because it pushed me to have these hard conversations and high stakes negotiation. But one thing that my former employer, they kept coming, a few months after I'd been gone, they kept knocking at my door. Will you come back? Will you come back? Because like any good relationship, right? Sometimes we have to break up for you to know what you had. So they asked me to come back, and I didn't tell them that I was going through hell on the other side of the coast. Gotta keep it close to the best. And so when it came down to it, me taking the position back, I said, well, now I want this because this is what you should have gave me when I was there. And now we have interest. And some might think, oh, you're being greedy. But I'm like, no, had things have turned out the way they were supposed to, I would have had this already. And so for better or worse, I was already in a situation making the money I was making. So I put everything out on the table. And I didn't want to move back to that coast. I wanted to work remotely. And so I put it all out on the table. And again, the part of the equation that we can control is what we put forward. And because they were coming back to me, I knew that I had some leverage, right? And they gave me what I wanted. I made the money I wanted. I stayed on the coast that I wanted. And I still was promoted 3 times after that. But sometimes we can be our worst enemy, right? Like if I would have thought logically about it, one person on my shoulder had been like, Minda, stop. You're doing too much. Don't do it. Don't ask for it. Just get out of this situation and go back to what you know. But I realized that as Audre Lorde said, I had to be deliberate and afraid of nothing. At this point, I've come too far, and I'm going to put it out on the table. And when we're deliberate about our moves, then that's the difference between just a seat at the table and securing your seat.
Very good. Thank you. I remember my question now. So we are in Portland, and there's a large majority here in Portland, but also just in business in general, we need allies. As you said, you have had a lot of help from a white man. So have I. This person who has hired me twice and got me here. I think it's because he just like hanging out with me, but whatever. And so, but there are always those uncomfortable conversations. And there's sometimes when I'll tell a leader, like, just say that the person's Black. Just say, I know your experience is probably different. Can you tell me about it? So what advice do you have for our allies in the room when it comes to asking questions, when it comes to knowing where the line is, and how to build that relationship where you both can learn?
Yep, that's a great question. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to the allies in the room, because this is where you need to be. You need to be hearing these stories, hearing the conversation, because it's hard to help someone or be an advocate if you don't know what they're going through, right? And so it's very important that you're part of the conversation. And so thank you for coming. Thank you for reading the book. And I don't want you to be alarmed just because that it says women of color, but this is just as much a part of your workplace as it is ours. And so the future of work requires that we all understand the experiences of everyone we work with. And it's important for you to understand that. And so I can't be successful without those partners. And I've talked about it in the book, but I shift the word of allyship because I feel like a lot of people are using that as a badge of honor that they could go pick up at the local corner store, not having done anything, right? Like, I'm an ally, and it's like, okay, great, but let me see your receipts.
Right.
You know, what have you been doing to move this thing forward? And so shifting allyship into action, and what does it look like to be in success with me?
An accomplice.
Yes, and so that's what I'm looking for, people who want to partner on success to this road to equity, belonging, inclusion, diversity. And so show me what you're working with, okay? Show me what you're going to do. And so for me, I need to see it. It's the rhetoric is well-intentioned, but it's time to turn it into action. And so I feel like reading the book, hearing our stories, and then once you've educated yourself, then we can have these conversations. But if you don't even educate yourself, and then you want to just come to me and only ask me about Black crap or Black stuff, I have other interests, right? There's other things I like to talk about. And if you get to know me, then it makes it easier for us to have these harder conversations because you're not only coming to me for that kind of stuff, right? And so that's exhausting. I don't go to my white friends only for white people stuff. I talk to them about...
You don't?
No.
Okay.
I know, a shocker,
Noted.
right?
Yeah.
They have other interests. We talk about Game of Thrones. We talk about stuff. And then we also, and one of the things that this book did is one of my childhood friends in the predominantly white environment, she read the book and she was like, oh my God, I'd probably microaggress you your whole life. And I'm like,
Yes, and?
yes, but I know you did it in love. I said, but she's like, you know what? These are the things that now we can have a conversation. I hadn't even thought about some of the things that you wrote about. And I've heard from other white men and women who've emailed me about it and said, I'm so happy because I didn't know. I thought I should keep saying I'm colorblind and that's going to make you feel better. No, that I want you to see me. I want you to see me in everything I bring. And so it's very important that we have these conversations, and we want to have these conversations when you come correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So when it comes to that,
Because we're talking about this stuff behind closed doors. Just so you know, we're talking about this. It's very real to us. And so I think now we're inviting you into the conversation to have it with us. And so courageous listening.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we mentioned white fragility earlier. Mm-hmm. We mentioned the work that needs to be done, and how you have to show that you care and not just hire someone like me to do diversity stuff. And it's been interesting to change the conversation, but it doesn't guarantee a change in results.
Right.
But I'm realizing that there is a desire, but maybe just not the language to articulate that desire without feeling that you're going to offend someone. Mm-hmm. So maybe, I know you're not white, I can tell by looking at you, but if you were, like, how would you go about, other than reading your book? Mm-hmm. Because we can go from literally cradle to grave and know only white people. And when you die, if you die ever, there will be nothing that tells you that you should have. There's nothing in history or empirical evidence that shows you that you should be promoting people of color, that you should care about women. So how do you cross that bridge and say, like, yes, I know, like, you don't have to do this,
right?
But when you do, like, you gain so much more. And that's kind of the diversity question: is like, what is the business case for this? Fuck a business case. It is just the right thing to do. But some people don't see it that way.
Right. So first off, I want to say thank you to New Relic, because your team have brought in people from other locations, women of color, to be a part of this conversation right now. And I just want to say thank you to you all, because that's the action. That's the action that we need to see in other companies. And so I think that that's really intentional, right? Because we could have these conversations and it not be beneficial, but right. For them to put their money where their mouth is and say, this is important, we're investing in this way. And yes, maybe everything isn't perfect every place, but we'll all remember this day, right? We'll go back and talk about it and the importance that we have here today. So, in opening up the doors to have these conversations, because I've been invited to companies and the leaders, white leaders, have said to me, tell me what you're going to say before you say it. Mm-hmm. And because,
Of course.
Never
had those meetings.
Yeah, and so I'm like, I'm not going to burn the place down. Just relax. It's okay. These are conversations that we need to have. And then after we talk, they're like, oh, this was great. But it's that caution of advancing the conversation where the narrative isn't centered around white people only. And I think that there's room for all of us to be at the table. I'm not saying that we're trying to kick anybody else out, but what does it look like? We can have a much better conversation when there's different voices, different perspectives around the table. And the future of work requires that we all understand each other a little bit better. And so I think we need to build companies that's embedded in our culture. And for all those people that don't want to, they can all go to another place and have that situation. Because I think that the people who want to make it work and want to create those environments, we're going to find each other and we're going to thrive and we're going to show them what the business case is. But let's stop those people who don't want to do it. Let's stop working at those places, right? And find the places that are going to invest in us.
I think that's a great place to stop from me asking you questions and open up to the floor.
You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Minda.
All right, everybody, help us make our Q&A extra great by following a few rules. 1, make sure you're asking a question. 2, asking one question, so everybody has a chance to hear from our speakers. If we have extra time for you to ask a second question, we can do that. And then keep your questions short and focused on the topics discussed. And rather than me trying to chase everybody around this maze, maybe if you have a question, let's line up over here in the corner. Anybody?
We've answered all your questions.
Yes,
right?
Safe space.
Thank you for your amazing presentation. So I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And when I was reading the chapter where you said, go out 6 p.m. And I'm like, oh, my kids, I have a black son that I'm raising in America. I have to show up for him. Do you have strategies for women who have kids in terms of how to build relationships with people who can open doors for us?
Yes, and kudos to you for rearing our next generation of people. So I would say this, yes. So everything, I make the joke that things happen after 6, which they do, some business decisions, but also some of us have priorities after work, and so I would encourage you to utilize lunch hours, ask your colleagues to lunch, the coffees, taking 15 minutes and, go into a conference room. So utilize, what I'm saying is make yourself known, build those relationships. They don't have to be after 6, but if you can say, you know what, I'm not going out at all, what would it look like if I go out a couple times this year, right? Just to show your face, some face time, but utilizing those other hours in the day. And so, yes, there's work to get done, but I think the more that we build those relationships across the board. Recently, I was at a company doing a workshop, and they had a reorganization. And one of the women, and we were talking about the power of a good network, and one of the women, she shared a story that her whole department got laid off but her, because she had a friend in a different department that she had made, and even though she had no experience in that department, they brought her on. And the power of a network, the power of an internal squad, and that was because she was building relationships outside of just her floor and her department.
Yeah, because you know that others are doing it.
Yes.
You need to be doing the same thing.
Absolutely. Good luck.
Hi, thank you again for just being open and having these conversations. I've definitely related to a lot of the things that you've said. I would say I'm pretty new to a D&I role, and oftentimes when I'm having conversations with executives in the space, they don't understand some of these topics, and instead of being open to creating spaces that are for underrepresented communities, they say we should just be human and we should, make these spaces more inclusive. How do I overcome that intelligently and politely?
That's for you, girl.
Well, you get this. You go to this thing called a door, and then you kick it down. I think a couple things. So one, you have to take care of yourself, because this work is so emotionally, what's the word I'm looking for? Taxing. And you have to realize that. You have to also realize that it is not you can't hire the people. You can't make these folks want to learn about this stuff, but you probably can find someone who's a data analyst who can give you some people data to show something that's really obvious, it's an issue, and then tee that up with some qualitative data. So bringing exactly a business case, and I know it sucks my soul sometimes, but making it clear and obvious as to how this affects the bottom line, I think is really important. And then if you get budget, or if you have a space, you can come here, but just do something. You don't have to do anything intense. You can hold an event at a bar of all the people who are in the DEI space. And not only is that refreshing, but you get a lot of ideas. And also it shows your leaders that you are invested in this, and this is what you get when you would do invest in it. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So I had a conversation with a friend of mine about diversity and inclusion a while ago, and it ended up as a shouting match entirely. The question was, she felt that every time in her company, because she's like the only Black person on the table, they look to her to be the solution to whatever their diversity issue is. My response to that was, well, I see that as an opportunity to educate. Maybe they don't know. Then she's like, well, it shouldn't be like that. I shouldn't be the one person solution to all their diversity problems. What would be your take on that, so that more of a constructive conversation than two opposing views?
You are the D&I
Okay. Man, this is a tough one, because that person has two choices. They can put their heads down and do their thing and say, I am not all Black people, or they can engage and say, I am not all Black people. But if you want to have a deeper conversation about this, I am completely open. But the opportunity and the issue, or the problemtunity as I call them, is that if you're going to be the only one in the room, show them why you're there.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that there's a responsibility that some of us, I say that you might be the first one, but you don't have to be the last one. So when we get in the space, how are we creating those seats and bringing others along? So if she doesn't want to stay in that environment, what is the short-term wins that she can make before she maybe just throws her hands up and like, I've had enough? But what are those things that you could push forward and find those success partners that can help push some things forward? And so maybe if she, I talk about this in the book, this enemy state of mind versus empire state of mind. If she sees her opportunity, what did you call it? A opportunity a little bit better, and just strategy, right? So how can she get the most out of her seat at the table, right? So to position it for if she doesn't stay there, but some things have been, some impact, some progress has been made. So maybe looking at it a little bit differently.
And at least they're asking her.
Yep, that's a good place.
Small wins.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Christina, and so I'm originally from the South. I've been living here for about a year, and I come from a city where you walk out your door and you're not too hard-pressed to see Black and brown faces. So coming to Portland last year was a little bit of a culture shock for me, to say the least. And fortunately, I came here with the intention of making sure that I found like other Black and brown folks and creating space or finding space. And then also I work at a really great nonprofit that works with people of color. So in that respect, I've been able to, I don't know. Yeah, I've been able to like find my niche, but I'm interested in knowing like what you do for like self-care, what you do to just combat like just the day-to-day microaggressions and different experiences that a lot of Black women have to face in the corporate world. And yeah, I guess that's my question.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I think some of it is that having these spaces, allowing ourselves permission to heal and acknowledging these pains and these traumas that we're experiencing. When I was going through a certain situation in the book, the chapter is called Everybody Can't Be a Golden Girl. And in that section, I realized that I was going through a lot of things that I did not talk about, because I felt like there was shame. I had taken this job from one coast to the other. I got to make it work. I can't tell people that these things are happening to me. So I had to take on that strong Black woman persona. And I did myself a disservice not finding those people to talk about the stuff that is bothering us, because we learn to settle into the microaggressions. We learn to settle into the bias. And that's not a good place. That's not a good state to be in. And so I would encourage you to continue to find those, maybe if you don't get it at your current company, but you find maybe it's somebody in the Atlanta office, right? It's somebody in the San Francisco office, and you guys have that girl time where let's get on that blue jean and let's have a conversation. Okay, let's get on Zoom. Let's have a conversation, because we have to talk about these things with each other, and that's the way we heal. Like Erykah Badu, she said, bag lady, and if we keep allowing those things, those bags are going to get in our way. And we got to learn to pack light. And so find those people that you can pack light with, and you can find them. They may not be sitting next to you, but they're here in the room. You know, there's plenty of people. And so find those people and allow yourself, the ones that you feel comfortable with, to have those, hey girl, you know, conversations. Because I wish that I would have allowed myself permission to be vulnerable in that way. And I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice because maybe you're going through it too, Mandy, and we can have those conversations. You might be just what I need, and I might be what you need to help us keep moving forward. And so I think if we see each other as resources and assets, then we can have any seat that we want.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I will say one other word, one word called therapy. It is our parents do not like to talk about therapy. It is not a thing. We're not depressed. There's nothing wrong with us. And that is an easy way, because you're paying someone to be vulnerable with, who's not going to judge you, and it's a great start. And then you'll get more comfortable, talking to other people.
Yep, absolutely. I did therapy for 3 years. And it was one of the best things that I could have done for myself, because I wasn't used to talking about my feelings in that way. I was, I'm the oldest child. That's just not I was not comfortable with that. And it's so funny when I look at who I've become, we're allowed to reshape our narratives, right? And who wrote this book today, Mandy, I'm like, I don't even know who this is, because I was so vulnerable in talking about it, and that freedom, allowing myself to be free and heal, because once I was able to heal, then I could see and dream bigger and allow myself to, when I sit at the table, I can lift my head up. I can articulate, or I can quantify my worth, and I can let you know what my boundaries are. But when I didn't have that healing, it really stunted my growth.
Yeah.
Hi. I resonated when you talked about allyship is really about action, not just gotcha. But I'd like your opinion on how to confront it. So if you're let's say I was in the car with you when that comment was made about you people like bright colors.
Mm-hmm.
What should there's an instinct that you would have the conversation off to the side, but that doesn't really set an example for others because it was just you and that other person. So what would you like to see or recommend that allies do in the face of it right in front of them?
Well, I want to say thank you for asking that question, because that I'm glad that you picked up on that, right? Because there was a second person in that car who could have been what I needed to get through that car ride, but they chose not to. And I'm sure they felt just as uncomfortable as I did, right? And so one of the things that I talk about in the book is that when I was going through this really tough situation at this one place, my allies, my friends, the people I was going out to happy hours with, they would come behind closed doors and be like, I don't know how you're doing it, Minda. You're so strong. I wish, I'm sorry this keeps happening to you. I mean, they would be in like a carousel, always telling me behind closed doors. And it was and I talk about this, I'm like, I don't know what hurt more, that this person is doing this and you all are watching it go down. And these are supposed to be my work friends, right? And so for me, I often think back to that moment of, had just one of them stood up for me, how much that would have changed the trajectory of maybe my experience in that workplace. Had two maybe said something in private. And so again, I didn't expect one of them to get on the table and be like, stop doing this, stop saying this, but at least they could have at least maybe pulled that person, I call her Carrie in the book, they could have pulled Carrie to the side and said, Carrie, I see what you're doing with Minda. I think, you need to lay off, or whatever your language is, and how do you think she feels being, blah, 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 blah. But person to person, human to human, like I shouldn't have to be the only one that takes that has to own that, right? So what would it look like for you to go to that person? Or, yes, come to me and say, you know what, I'm sorry that, like that person in the back seat, he could have come to me and said, Minda, I'm sorry that happened. I will never let that happen again to you. I will be there the next time someone says something like that to you. I apologize that I wasn't there for you in that moment. And so acknowledging it and then saying, I'm going to do better next time. So when we see it, we all know when someone's being mistreated. We act like this is some like rocket science stuff, right? But we know when someone's being mistreated. What are we going to do? And we can do that for sister to sister, right? We'll sit and let that happen to one of our own just as much. And so I'm saying, I would want you to stand up for me just like I should be standing up for you. And I think that's just that humanity piece. If we're talking about the human-centered, as humans, do we want this to be happening to our colleagues, right? Does that help? Thank you.
So nice to meet you. My name is Melissa. I just really want to thank you for keeping it 100 through this whole conversation, because my head has just been nodding the entire time. And one of the things that really stood out to me when you said often these things aren't documented, and so much of it can be microly progressed to the point that even if I do say these things, will I be believed if it's documented? Mm-hmm. And what does that even look like in terms of worthwhile documentation and that journey and exhausting ourselves to that point? What does that even look like when it comes to that level of accountability?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it from my lens, and then I'd love for you to chime in on that. So one of the situation that I did go through in that situation, so Carrie, her best friend worked at she was the head of HR. So I felt like I couldn't go to HR because I couldn't go to HR. And so, for so long, I kept telling myself that this wasn't real. This wasn't happening. I was going through these mental gymnastics, like, this can't be racism. And oftentimes, as people of color, we do not use the race card. People think that we just like to pass things out. No, that's the last card we want to use, okay? If we flip that Uno card over, then it meant that we had no other option. And so I was like, I don't want to use it. I'm not going to use it. And I kept trying to tell myself that this isn't what it was, and it was this. And I didn't feel like I could go and talk to anybody about it, because to your point, who's going to believe me? They're just going to tell me that they didn't mean any harm, I'm taking it the wrong way, and then it's my problem, right? And so I let all of those narratives stop me from doing it. And even if that was her best friend, because I play it in my head, I'm like, I should have documented it. I should have had it even on paper. Even if no one believed me, at least I had the paper trail, and I should have gone to HR, because if something had really happened even worse than it already did, at least it'd be on the books, right? And so the other thing to therapy, one thing that when we talk about strategy, is that even if you don't feel like you need it, if you're going through a thing, go to therapy, because that's another documentation, right. Okay? And so having all of these things laid out, but again, doing it in a way that it's not just saving the emails, but you're like, you have it for that rainy day, because you just never know. I still have the emails in my old Hotmail account of when Carrie was doing it. I have a folder, and that situation happened several years ago. But it's important for me to know that documentation, just to have it for me. So I think for you, or for each of us, we have to realize what our cutoff is. And I had an expiration date at that place that I didn't adhere to. And I think if I can make something really clear, sometimes there are expiration dates, and we're trying so hard to get to a table that was never wanted us there to begin with. And once you get that seat, it's going to be even harder to keep it. And you're going to have a whole host of other problems. So finding those tables that are right for you. Again, we all have options. And so when you feel like the documentation is too much, then that's probably when it's time to chuck up the deuces and bounce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I like to keep receipts, whether it's paper, like pen to paper, because a lot of times when we go to HR, I work with HR, I go on behalf of someone else. So if you are going on behalf of someone else and you are saying that these things happen, you can understand, okay, where does HR see that this is like an actual fireable offense, or is it just like they're calling you stupid and I can't really do anything about it? So you understanding on behalf of someone else, it's always great to ask for a friend, is really helpful, so that you can strategize when you do go to HR, like what will I talk about? What will I do to defend myself here? And then also, like, is it even worth it?
That too.
Let me get on LinkedIn, turn that notice on.
Yeah,
Again,
we have options. I think sometimes we count ourselves out, or we think we don't have options, but there is healing on the other side, and there's options, and there's there's tables that want us there, or it's creating your own, but knowing that you do have that option.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Speaking on the topic of receipts, I've been in my situation personally. I'm just nodding my head like everyone else, especially where you have receipts, everything's documented to a T, and the situation continues to boil over. But I would like for you to talk a little bit about having confidence to use those receipts. I went through a situation where went through the whole HR process. HR was against it, and I went to therapy during the situation, because you do have to keep that strong Black woman face where people are saying, I don't know how you're dealing with this, I can't imagine. But after work, I was dealing with it. But I had to still keep very poised throughout everything. Can't let it affect your work, because if you let it affect your work, then there's repercussions for that, So, but after the situation was over, I was just so happy to have obtained another job, to have an exit to that I didn't have the confidence I was so mentally and emotionally exhausted afterwards of utilizing those receipts. And because I could have had a case, I could have had something there, but I was just so relieved to be done. Mm-hmm. And I would like for you to talk a little bit about, or if you have any advice on when you keep those receipts, having the confidence to, when your hand is to actually utilize your hand and not just having them and sitting on them?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I host a podcast called Secure the Seat, and I made the joke about a couple episodes ago about there was an episode I did on toxic workplaces, and I said that former employer should send me a check for not taking their butt. So I'm not using the receipts. They should send me a thank you check. And I was too beat down. It was too arduous a fight. I barely made it out of there. I was crawling out of the door when I left that place. And so I couldn't fight. There's nothing left in me. And so I think we have to make those decisions based off of individually where we are. And some people I know who have fought that fight. I have a friend that's fighting that fight right now, but it's a hard fight. They've been without a paycheck for 6 months. I think it will turn out in their favor, but if you're going to fight that fight, it's a fight. And I think that you have to make those decisions. I wish that I could tell you this is what you do and this is what you don't. But one of the things I'm very clear about in the book is like, this isn't 5 steps on how you do this. Here's a option, here's another option, and I want you to realize that you have options. But you have to make them that's right for you. So for me, it wasn't right for me to go down the path and litigate. I just didn't have it in me. I think it would have probably messed me up even more just because I was so fragile. But there are those situations where we need those people who do have to be the revolutionary to push that button and go forward, because that's how change is made. And so, make those hard decisions based off of where you are and that self-care aspect, because once you go down that path, that's a whole another animal. And so I think that again, knowing that you have options. I think so long we think that we don't have options or that we can't do certain things, and it really just, you have to, again, have those squad members, have those people that you could talk to, but then also consult with. Don't be afraid to consult with an attorney and get some feedback, right? So have that courage to even have those conversations just so you can better prepare yourself for what you want to do next. I think that's important too.
We know there's plenty of Black attorneys out there.
Yes.
And also I would say, there's so much to learn from those experiences once you do get through your trauma, because I've been there too. It took me 6 months and I'm still getting over it. Because then when you start to go through it, you're realizing like, oh, and then that happened. And then that happened. Oh, okay, I see what they were doing. And so knowing what those things were so that you can catch them this time, I think is so empowering. Mm-hmm. And like Minda's been saying this whole night, like knowing your worth. Because now that you've been through that, I would never know that any of that happened because you're so confident.
Yep. And you're in a new role now? Yeah. And so, okay. And so one of the things that I want to encourage you and to anyone, when we leave those bad situations and we're in our new place, allow yourself to enjoy that, because sometimes we have so much baggage and then we see certain things and you experience like that PTSD, and it might not even be that, but we have so much pain and hurt built up in us that we don't allow ourselves to thrive in our new role. So allow yourself to thrive in it, because that healing process is so important, because now you may be at the best company of your life, your dream job, but if you keep going back or holding on to those receipts, then you're not going to enjoy and thrive the way you want to. Yep.
Great. We're going to wrap up with these 2 more questions and then we'll be done.
Thank you. Hey guys, Minda and Mandy, thank you for actually having the courage to talk about real things that we're dealing with today. My name is Vivian and I'm on the commercial sales team out of Atlanta. And a lot of people may or may not know this, but Atlanta is known to have some of the best, minority talent, if you will. So I'm happy to see that we're kind of making strides, not just New Relic, but all over software sales or software companies to have that. But still, I am the only Black woman globally that is in my position in commercial sales. And at first I saw it as a badge of honor, like, yeah, I'm different and I'm with, some of the people that look alike, but I look differently. But now I've started to look at it like, okay, something's actually wrong with this. And I'm kind of going into a business venture where I'm looking to have a sales training course that I will have for minorities. So apart from the obvious sales training that I should be teaching, like, what would you say is 1 or 2 agnostic pieces that I could start to talk about when I have those conversations with minorities like me?
Yes. I think it was what Minda was saying, that how things do happen after 6, and when you're strategic about what those things are that you're going to get into after 6, and not just turning it up as you do say in your book, and knowing when to go home, I think that is really, really important. I think also thinking about things that are outside of your job where you're saying, I'm investing in myself. So whether that's what I did, got my yoga teacher training because I wanted to invest in myself. You can audit a college course so that you're investing in yourself. And then you're following the 80-20 rule where the 20% of the things that you're doing with your time, which are those extracurriculars, really do help 80% of your results. So thinking strategically about how you want to use your extra time, especially at your age. I mean, gosh, you got time. Sorry, that was me. My bias. So yeah, thinking about it strategically.
Yeah, I think that's good. And also in the book, I write about getting really clear about our career purpose statements. And there's templates in the book and resources that I include. So it's not just, me telling you stories, but also some tangible things at the end, and really honing in on what you want out of your career. So if you're in this role and you want to, you don't want to be the only one in the situation, how are you creating? What are the strategies that you're implementing to help change that? And so I talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and looking at them in a career context. So what are your basic needs, and going up the pyramid? And when you start to figure out what it is you want out of the position that you're in, what impact you want to make, creating those strategies to help you get there. And then you take that strategy in those pyramids that you've created, and you talk to your direct report about them and see how you can make this happen. And this is another opportunity for you to take on a leadership role, is to say, hey, I want to embed this, this, and this so that we get this as the result. And if you see that that's not happening, then that's another kind of conversation to have. But I think there's, again, if we're looking and being more strategic about some of the things that we're doing, and having these conversations, because, our managers and things, they don't have like a magic ball or 8-ball. They're not like, what does Minda want today? We have to go and we have to tell them and give them our plan and our case for support. And so I think, again, us having our receipts too and really getting clear on what we want. So I encourage you to keep doing that. So thank you for your question.
Hi, Minda and Mandy. Again, thank you, as everyone has said, for the talk and just all the topics that we've covered today. I wanted to ask, for me, a little more of a difficult question as far as the challenge that you'll face in those situations, in those moments where you'll have a teachable moment that you can teach someone, or you come across a difficult situation like you did with the bright colors in the car and everything. A lot of times I feel like I've come across situations where women or people of color in certain situations are fearful. Like you said, I'm just so grateful that I got into the role that I don't want to make waves. So as another woman or person of color coming into that situation, and you are vocal and trying to make yourself audible, and then maybe white people or people that you're trying to make yourself audible to ask the other person of color, are you valid? Is that person valid? Do you feel like that? And because of fear, or maybe not wanting to be associated with the person making waves that's the same color as them, they say, no, they're just over exaggerating, or, that's not really a big deal. So the actual person of color invalidates you and kind of pushes your attempt to be audible and make yourself heard down. How do you really face that and kind of move forward through that when you would think your ally in the room is kind of invalidating you out of fear?
Preach, preach, preach. I'm hearing that a lot on the road. My experience, I haven't worked with, I've always been one of the only ones, so I haven't had that experience. But what I'm hearing on the road, city to city, is that some of the heartbreak are happening Black woman to Black woman, or woman to woman of color. And so that breaks my heart too, because we're supposed to be resources for each other. And, the whole point of bringing, hopefully, someone else adding to the table. But what I realize is we're going to always have those gatekeepers, right? We're always going to have those people who don't serve the interests of the people that look like them. And so in those situations, it's really difficult, because some of those individuals that person's kowtowing to them, and so they're going to take their advice over yours, right? And that's so unfortunate, and I wish that I had a good answer for that, because it's hard to dismantle those systems that are embedded, because that's perpetuating systems of racism, right? Because you're having those people who are saying, oh, I'm not like her, I'm the, and I even would do that back in the day when I first started in my career, and I think there was one other black girl, and she used to make waves, right? And I would be like, I'm not sitting by her in the meeting, I'm going over here because I don't want to be affiliated with that. I'm the good black girl, I'm not going to cause any trouble. But we're perpetuating some of these negative stereotypes on our own, and I think when we call it out, have you ever had a conversation with that person? And as we're having courageous conversations with our, white coworkers, we should be having those courageous conversations with those people of color as well to let them know, hey sis, what's this about? And I think we have to do that. And I don't think we're having those conversations enough. We're just like, that person's doing this and whatever, but having those conversations, I think we're going to have to do that and put them on blast a little bit and have those conversations. Say, wouldn't it be better if we were working together? What could we do if we both were saying, she has a good idea and pushing each other forward? And so it really breaks my heart that those situations are happening. So let's not be those people. But when we've had workplace broken hearts, we become sometimes like those people because we haven't given ourselves the time to heal. So let's not become those people.
Yeah. And historically, that is exactly the way that folks stay in power, is they divide and conquer and make you feel like you should be against each other. So I think I want to second that, and having that courageous conversation is going to be really important.
Yep.
You can do it.
Yes. Keep us posted.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, help me again to thank Minda and Mandy for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I take a picture of you all? Just
Yeah.
so, when they told me that there's no audience for this, I like to take a picture of the audience, okay? All right, thank you.